beauty of the gospel of Jesus is as we put our faith in Jesus, he looks at us draped and covered in his Son. He would never turn his face away from us. He turned away from his Son so that he would never have to turn away from us. And there's the unchangeable covering that we see in this, do we not? It never changes, no matter what we do. That's the picture that I want you to see. It's not just about what's been done to us. No matter what we do, God constantly covers us and provides a context in which we can commune with him. There's never a moment where God turns his face so that we can't commune. The devil wants you to think that there are moments that come in which God doesn't look at you because he says, how could I look at you like that? But the psalmist, he has this superficial fear of God's turning away, not only because of his own personal transgression, but because also of his personal opposition. You see that here in the verses. In verse 10, he says, though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me. Verse 12, do not turn me over to the desire of my foes, for false witnesses rise up against me, breathing out violence. So he cries for mercy, implying a need for mercy, and he cries for deliverance, implying a need for deliverance. He recognized the presence of enemies. And he, like us, he wonders, does he have enemies as a result of his own indiscretion? Does he have enemies as a result of doing something wrong, bad, against God? Are the presence of enemies, are they a sign, or are they symptoms of the truth that God has turned away from him? Brothers and sisters, this is why fellowship is so important. This psalmist, which by the way is none other than David, is questioning God's view of him based on his enemy's view of him. That's why Hebrews 10 would remind us, let us not forsake the gathering of assemblies, but let us encourage one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. This should be the greatest day of encouragement for every single person in this room. And if you came here today too discouraged, you came here to do the work of the devil. Make no mistake about it. If you are discouraging, you're doing the work of the devil. If you intend to discourage, you will be doing the work of the devil. Make no mistake about it, brothers and sisters. Because what we see in David is he's wondering, man, I feel like God's turning his face away from me because of all these people who are against me. And he questions whether or not God loves him, whether or not God's still viewing him as a friend. That's why we need each other as brothers and sisters. The fellowship is that important. Because if even this person loves me, then maybe even God still loves me. So he acknowledges a superficial fear that God is turning away. But he also, in the same psalm, in the same prayer, acknowledges that there is a depth to his faith that reminds him that there's no way God will turn away. So he says, God, are you turning away? I know God's not going to turn away. That's how we know this is genuine and sincere prayer, because he sounds like a crazy person. I often feel as though I sound like a crazy person in my prayers. This statement, by the way, in verse 10, though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me. Robert Alter, who wrote a phenomenal book on Psalms, said it this way: the extravagance of this declaration of trust in God, perhaps the most extreme in the whole Bible, is breathtaking and perhaps even disturbing. Wow. Do you get what David is saying? What he's saying here is he has confidence that God will not abandon him. It is more likely to David that his father and his mother will abandon him than God. And even if his father and or his mother do abandon or fail him, the love of God will cover him. The word that's used here in this verse The Lord will receive me. It's to take in and cover. It's used for a refugee. It was used for a dog or an animal that was out in the streets, that was brought in, taken in, rescued, and then covered with kindness and affection. That's the picture of God. David says, even if I'm out there wandering in the streets because my family has abandoned me, God takes me in and he covers me. Oh, is this not solace for those who might not have had the best relationship with their father and mother? Whew. Hey, God says, I'll take you. Did they abandon you? Doesn't matter. I'll take you. I'll take you, God says. I'll cover you. I'll give you my name. I'll give you my legacy. I'll cover you. That's some solace there, brothers and sisters. In the event that those closest to him would abandon him, God never will. God will give him refuge when everyone else abandons him. Consequently, his communion with God surpasses communion with any other human, because any and every other human could potentially abandon him, but not as God. God never will. By the way, this is coming from a man whose father figure in Saul and his son Absalom both rebelled against him. And even his own brothers, when we see him going to fight Goliath, they said, what are you doing here, man? Get out of here. We see his family pushing him away. And David says, God never pushed me away. I don't know about you, but the statements of Jesus in Luke 14:26 seem odd and a little bit crazy. I said seem. This is the passage when Jesus says, if anyone would come after me and follow me, he must hate his father and his mother, his own son and his daughter. We go, whoa, Jesus, calm down, brother. Now, I think we better understand it in light of a verse like this. What's Jesus saying? He says, all right, imagine there's a scale, and on one end of the scale, there's love, and on the complete opposite end of the scale or the spectrum, there's hate. He says, your love for me should be such, it should be so far down on this scale that when we identify where you are on the scale of loving your family, it should be closer to this side of the scale. That's how much you love me. That's how far it is on that scale. Why? Because when we compare the love of God, love, hate, the love of God is so far removed on this side of the scale that when we diagnose and look at love that our family has for us, it's so much closer to the pole, to the side, to the scale of hate than love. That's why we love God so much more than we love any human, because he loves us so much more than any human could ever love us. It's not even close. It's unchangeable. His covering, it will not break. It will not stop. He constantly provides a context for communion. So we see the internal call for communion with God. We see the immutable, unchanging covering and communion with God. Next, we see the incomparable comfort in commitment to God. I told you, he asked for a level path. I don't want to fall off. God, don't make it easy, God. Just make sure I stay on it. You remember who this is, right? Give me a level path, God. I'm not asking for an easy one. His whole story is draped in a difficult path. He's a shepherd boy on the hills of Bethlehem, and he's walking those paths daily. And a lion and a bear jump out. But he's walking that path with God. It's not an easy path, but it's his path. And he walks it, and God provides for him. God takes care of him. And then one day he goes and he hears the cries of a giant, and he walks that path, does he not? Into the valley of Elah. Not a comfortable path, God, but give me a level path. And he walks that path through the valley of Elah, and he faces that giant, and he kills him, cuts his head off. And then it's at that point we think he would be king. Oh no, he's got to spend time in the caves of Adullam crying out to God, how long, oh Lord, will you forget me forever? Years in the caves, walking the path. As Saul's coming after him to kill him, every day, walking the path that God has for him. It's not an easy path. It's not a comfortable path. But it's the path that God has for him, and he trusts God. And finally, God leads him onto the path that would lead him into the throne room over Israel. And I would submit to you that that was the most difficult place to serve God, because that's where we see him fall, is it not? And even as he falls, then his son rises up against him. We see another path from David as he goes across the valley, leaving Jerusalem, crying the whole way on this difficult and uncomfortable path that God has him on. But then he follows that path back into the throne room to be the king once again. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. This is a man who knew what it was like to walk the difficult path. This was a man who knew what it was like to be in an uncomfortable situation, uncomfortable realities around him. And all he asked for from the Lord was, God, do not cast me from your presence or take your spirit from me. And God, keep me on the level path, because I know my path is going to be hard, but make sure I stay on it and I don't wander off. God, keep me on the path. And his confidence was not in the external situation. It was in whether or not God was still God, keeping him on the path. So his comfort wasn't found in the nature of the path, but in the nature of his God. And that makes all the difference in the world when we're talking about our comfort level. We've got it backwards. We base our comfort too much on the nature of the path rather than the nature of our God. Finally, we see the internal call for confidence in God. We started with the internal call for communion with God. But notice how he ends it here. He says, I'm still confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Verse 14, wait for the Lord. Who's he talking to? Is he talking to himself? Is he talking to us? The answer is yes. Just in case you have the opportunity to hear him, he's talking to himself, but he's talking through himself to us. I will wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. It's an appropriate summary. That he says to himself, believe and wait. Believe and wait. His heart finds its courage in his communion with God. He spent time with the Lord and he is filled with courage. If we are not filled with courage today, it is because we are not spending enough time in communion with God. I love how Temper Longman relates this psalm to Romans 8. And he does it in such an incredible way, and it's so fascinating to think about that. And he connects it based on verse 1. The Lord is my light and my salvation. And he says we find in Jesus the light, as John 1 tells us, and he is our salvation. And Romans 8 reminds us, what can separate us from the love of God? Answer, absolutely nothing. Rest in that. Walk in that. Those who walk in the Lord will not run away in fear. What do we glean from this psalm? Communion with God. Commune with him, brothers and sisters. It's not about religion. We say it all the time, don't we? Do we really mean it? We mean it when we are communing with God, the personal, not the formal religiosity, the personal communion. God is the God of creation who can hold you and sustain you no matter what. But he's also the God of the manger who came to dwell with men, who came to walk this earth, who came to live inside of you. That's not so that we could simply come to a building once a week. It's so that we can engage in a relationship with him whenever we want to commune with God. That's why Jesus came. That's what this is all about. Would you bow with me? I invite you in this moment to respond to God. That response can look any number of ways. One of the possible ways is for you to ask God in this moment to forgive you of your sins. You realize, because God has helped you to see, that you are in need of mercy. And it's time for you to ask him to forgive you and give you new life. And I invite you to do that now. You can begin that conversation right now. Ask him to forgive you. Ask him to save you. Ask him to give you new life. If you have questions on that, we're going to be here. We'd love to talk to you and help you with that. I invite you to come. Let's talk about it if you need to. If you want to, please come. But you don't need to talk to us. More than anything, you need to talk to God in this moment. You need to interact with him. Do you need to be forgiven and saved and given new life? I invite you to do that right now. Respond. Maybe you're here and your communion's not what it used to be. Maybe it's not what you would like it to be. Maybe you've been just going through the motions and it's been cold and formal. And you need God to remind you and to empower you to remember that this thing is personal. This is personal. And so I want to encourage and invite you to respond in this moment by having a conversation with Jesus. You can come. We'd love to pray for you. The altar's open if you want to come here. Well, what's the goal here? The goal here is for you to walk with God, for you to be in communion with God. And he's provided all you need to experience that. We simply need to walk in it. Would you do that in this moment? Maybe you're here today and you want to be a part of what God's doing. We've talked about today all that God's doing in this place. Maybe God's called you to step out and be a member. We invite you to do that in just a minute. Come and join us. We'd love to have you. Maybe he's called you today to volunteer, to serve. We'd love to have you.